FSP is one of the leading power supply manufacturers in the world. I bet you'll never guess what they sent me. A Mid Tower. You read the title, you cheater. FSP's CMT210 case comes in at a lightweight 4.68 kilograms, 432 millimeters tall, 200 millimeters wide, and 460 millimeters deep. The front panel has some fairly subtle branding, a dust filter, and a graded design for awesome airflow, but we'll get back to that shortly. Front I/O has power and reset buttons that are very satisfying to click, as well as two USB 3.0 ports, microphone and headphone jacks, and a USB 2.0 port. Around to the bottom, we find 4 plastic feet that offer a little over a centimeter of elevation, and a power supply dust filter that we'll cry about later. The case supports mini ITX, micro ATX, and ATX form factor motherboards, CPU coolers up to 160 millimeters tall, and graphics cards up to 360 millimeters long. You'll find a hard drive cage up front that can fit 3 3.5-inch units, as well as 3 more spots for SSDs using the included toolless locking clips. The motherboard tray bears an admirable cutout for cooler installation, and lastly, we've got mounting options for up to 4 120mm fans, 3 in the front and 1 in the back. Alternatively, you can fit up to 2 140mm fans up front, or a 240, 280, or 360mm radiator. That's pretty rad. 2 blue LED fans come pre-installed, one is a rear exhaust and one is a front intake, but I'd recommend moving the front intake up to at least the middle of the case. My build is using the Corsair H110i water cooler, so I'll be dropping that front intake for 2 of Corsair's HD140 RGB fans in pull orientation. Now let's hear FSP's CMT really scream. FSP boasts supreme and optimal cooling, but let's challenge that claim. Our test configuration will consist of the i7-5820K processor clocked to 4.2 GHz at 1.3 volts, cooled by the aforementioned H110i cooler and the GTX 980 Ti Amp Extreme graphics card from Zotac. I recently reviewed the Corsair Spec 04 case and I found temperatures there to be a little high for my liking. Using the most comparable configuration, the Spec 04 gave me an average CPU temperature of 78.33 and an average GPU temperature of 64 and an ambient temperature of 23.2 degrees Celsius. Our Brave Challenger under similar conditions yielded CPU and GPU temperatures of 74 and 64 degrees Celsius respectively. Thermal performance is impressive since I would have expected completely unrestricted airflow to put my chip in the high 60s to low 70s. But, while the temps look good, we have to talk about the not so hot. At $60 US, this case is approaching the price point where I would almost expect to see a power supply shroud and rubber grommets. But then again, considering FSP also manufactures power supplies, maybe they're trying to show theirs off. But then again, the side panel window is a bit small, so it does cover up the bottom a tad. Small window or big window is personal preference, but I don't particularly like how the clips that hold the window in place are visible from the outside. As for the build process, there are a few cutouts towards the top, but most of them will be covered by your motherboard, except for this somewhat hidden one where I couldn't get my 8-pin CPU cable to fit. And then a few cutouts at the bottom, but ATX boards will cover those too. On the bright side, the bottom isn't so bad, as you can utilize the pass-through area for the power supply. I'm not fully in agreement with the orientation of the SSD mounted on top of the drive cage. It seems to only fit one way, so your cables will have to come around and show up right at the window like a kid peering into an electronics store. Trying to fit it the other way will most likely not allow for the cable connectors to fit. And while we're talking about drives, this part isn't necessarily a bad thing, just note that you'll want to install your 3.5-inch discs before setting up your front intake. You'll need to have some space to secure it, and that's something my dumb face overlooked. A small yet obvious thing to note is the front I/O connector colors. These are circus colors. I expected this kind of funny business to die in 2015. However, my biggest issue with this case is accessing the dust filters. The front panel comes off, but the dust filter itself is clipped in. Removing this front grate every time you want to clean it is a bit silly for a case at this price point, and you're probably better off holding a vacuum to its face. The bottom filter is practically impractical in terms of removal and installation. The case is pretty low to the ground, so if you've got big fat sausage fingers like me, you won't be able to access it easily without lifting the case up. Same story for putting the filter back, since the metal fingers that hold it in place don't allow it to slide in from any single angle. In my opinion, this case would probably be much better positioned at around $50 US, or at least include 2 more front intake fans. Aesthetics are subjective, some of you will think this looks awesome, and some of you won't. The case as well in terms of airflow, and I will admit that cable management due to the popped out panel was a breeze. But considering its cooling potential is supposed to be one of the main selling points, I find it odd that the dust filters are this unfriendly. Despite my criticisms, the case is fairly easy to work with, save the front panel being connected to the I/O cables, limiting ease of access. You've got a decent number of cutouts and tie-down points, and cable management was much better than I would have expected. Despite not having top fan mounting options, the case's airflow holds strong, and you've even got room to upgrade with flexible radiator support and lengthy graphics cards for those of you who acknowledge that bigger really is better. In conclusion, I'm a bit conflicted here. FSP CMT210 looks nice. It's simple, it's not overbearing, it's easy to build in, and airflow really is a strong suit. On the other hand, some people expect power supply shrouds, some people don't care. But as a gaming case with a window, those ridiculous cables are a real head scratcher. And I'm gonna have a stroke if I have to talk about those dust filters again. And not the good kind of stroke either. And so that's all I have to say about that. Like, dislike, comment, subscribe, share, leave your questions if you got them. Thanks for watching. My name is Steven and I am ALittleDIMM. Bye-bye. FSP's CMT, okay. FSP is one of the leading power supply manufacturers in the world. A USB 2.0. You'll find a hard drive cage up front that can fit three. I knew that was gonna mess me up because they have 3.5 inch. And I read it as like 3.3 and like, oh, that's a typo, and then it's not. So I'll be dropping that front intake for two of Corsair's, oh man. Now let's hear FSP's CMT really scream. I don't know if I like the way I did that, it felt really strange. FSP boasts supreme and optimal. FSP boasts. Any word that ends in an ST and then another S is weird, like boasts? Boasts? Costs? It's like weird. FSP boasts supreme, there's that word again. I mean, it's the same word, but it just sounds weird. Boasts. I'm not fully in agreement with the orientation of the SSD mounted on top of the drive cage. Oh, that's the end of the sentence. The case is fairly easy to work with, save the front panel, front panel. What is a panel?